Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It is Jordan, as promised, to talk about the video features on the upcoming Canon 1DX Mark III. We have a pre-production version that's shooting me right now. But before I start talking about this camera, I want to take a little trip in the Wayback Machine. I want to take you back to a time often referred to as 2008. And at that time, two idealistic young camera salesmen decided that they would start a YouTube channel, but at the same time, Canon released the 5D Mark II. And this camera gave us abilities we had never seen before in a camera at this price point. The problem was, the form factor was absolutely terrible to work with. We flash forward almost 12 years, and I'm stuck with the same conundrum with the new 1DX Mark III, an incredibly capable camera stuck in a professional DSLR body for some reason. So what this camera is offering is internal 10-bit 422 when you're shooting 4K with Canon's log profile, and most importantly, they're using full sensor readout for that. That means no crop in 4K. Now, the thing that you've probably been hearing all about is that this camera shoots RAW internally, and that is a major accomplishment. I just can't talk about it very much because, unfortunately, we have no way to actually open those files and look at them right now. What I can tell you is with a 128 gigabyte card, you are getting just over 5 minutes of record time. So you grab a 256 gig card, you've got about a reel of film back in the motion picture film days. It's extremely demanding, but it should give us incredibly flexible files when we get support for it. Of course, we'll be looking at that when we get to our full review. Another huge upgrade on this is we are now capable of shooting 4K 60 using the entire width of the sensor. Even with the 1DX2, we did have a crop when we were using that mode. Now, there are some drawbacks to it. We no longer have our dual pixel autofocus. It's going to go back to manual focus if you're shooting anything faster than 30 frames per second with this. But let's be honest, sometimes you need slow motion, and the camera will certainly deliver in those situations. No! Yes. There's another little quirk. You might notice this episode is a different aspect ratio, a little wider than most of our episodes. That's because if you're using the full width of the sensor when you're shooting 4K, right now it only gives you Cinema 4K. It doesn't give you your classic 16:9 Ultra HD format. Now, Canon has said that'll be coming later in a firmware update, so you should watch out for it. If there's one thing Canon's famous for in video, it's their dual pixel autofocus, which is tracking me right now and works up to 30 frames per second in 4K. Does a really wonderful job if you don't have a camera operator and you have to film yourself shooting with this. You can really trust the autofocus. As well, if you are manually focusing, it has the wonderful manual focus assist, where it'll actually tell you if it thinks you're in front or behind the subject you're tracking. Now, when I'm walking like that, you might notice that there is a whole lot of bounce in the shot. This camera does offer electronic image stabilization, but not IBIS, and there are some definite consequences with that. Here, I'll show you. So right now, Chris is filming me handheld with both lens IS and electronic stabilization turned off. At 4K 24p, we're using the entire width of the sensor right now. Now I've got electronic stabilization turned on. You can see it crops us a very tiny amount, and there is a slight degradation in image quality once we do that. Now we're in the enhanced IS, and you can see it's a big crop, big image quality penalty when we do that. And if I start walking here, what you're really gonna see is that, yes, the image does tend to float a little bit, but gets very, very soft. Not a pleasing image. Honestly, I would just use a gimbal or a Steadicam. This brings me to one of my biggest gripes about the 1DX3, which is that, yes, we have a very sharp display on it, but unfortunately there's no articulation whatsoever. Honestly, it's quite dim as well. Even in the shade, Chris is having a tough time seeing it, so this is a perfect time for us to head back inside, finish this up. All right, so we're in the nice, toasty, and most important, quiet indoors to test the preamps on the 1DX3, and honestly, this is the first time I've seen a noticeable improvement in Canon's preamps. They've always been famously terrible, and this does seem quite a bit better than what we saw before. That said, this is still a pre-production camera, so we'll have to wait for a production copy to see how it stacks up to the competition. The low light performance is another thing I was very excited to test, and it does look very good. Here you can see some examples at 6400, even 12,800 ISO. It's doing a good job, and I'm also impressed that the autofocus is keeping up in these extremely dark situations. Now again, I'm gonna have to wait until we get a production camera before I can see how it stacks up to the other competing cameras, but I've got to say this is definitely gonna be near the top of the pack. It's a little curious to note that on this giant brick of a body, Canon couldn't find a place to put a full-size HDMI port. We just have a mini HDMI port, which is very easy to damage. Now, one real disappointment for me is we're not able to capture a raw feed out of the HDMI into something like a Ninja, where we could get a nice compressed ProRes RAW or something like that. As is, if you want RAW out of this camera, you gotta shoot the giant uncompressed internal RAW files. One thing I do really love on this body is that it completely separates your stills and video settings, so I can use a nice punchy profile when I'm shooting photos, switch it over to video, it's already got it to the right shutter speed for me, and it keeps my log recording. I hate on so many other cameras constantly having to reset that whenever I jump between video and stills. At the top of this episode, I said that the 1DX3 really reminded me of the 5D2, and that is because if you're looking for a camera that's going to give you internal RAW recording, even internal 10-bit 4K, and you want amazing autofocus, it's really just this, or you're looking at a full cinema camera. The problem is this is all attached to a DSLR, and that means a big flipping mirror box and a heavy, expensive body. Now, I'm an optimist, and I like to think that right now Canon is working on an RF mount version of this camera that's going to give us all those same great features, but with an electronic viewfinder we can use while we're shooting video, hopefully a vari-angle display on it, and they have that wonderful EF to RF adapter with a variable neutral density filter in it. Not to mention the fact their RF glass is great for video autofocus, and there's some of the most exciting lens designs being made right now. So video shooters, you might want to hold off for that, but if you need a very capable still video hybrid right now, this is the best DSLR on the market for it. Don't forget, everybody, check out our Instagram, follow us on Twitter, and we'll see you all again with some more DP Review TV very soon.